and I'm pleased now to present my annual State of the City address. And I'm pleased that it begins on a happier note than last year's did. After the year 2020 was all but canceled by the pandemic, it was most refreshing to be able to regain some semblance of normalcy throughout 2021. Obviously, that's not to say the whole thing was over, and of course we know it's still not over today. But it was during 2021 that we began to reemerge from our isolation and find ways to come back together in person again, even if with some modifications. Given that what we're all about here is community, that was a pretty big deal for us. In 2021, we looked and felt more like the community we are, as we were able to bring back some of our most time-honored Bellaire traditions, like 4th of July and Holiday in the Park, and we even started some new ones. The business and governance of your city looked and felt a lot more normal as well, as staff returned to their offices and your city council and boards and commissions resumed meeting in person, having found those virtual meetings anything but optimal. 2021 was also the year of our One Bellaire initiative to encourage and inspire some civic pride in these difficult times, and it coincided nicely with our return to in-person programming, the whole point of One Bellaire being to bring people back together as a community. We've made some progress in that regard, and we should feel good about that, and I hope we'll continue working at it along with the rest of our deeply divided country. So that's pretty much the community aspect of the state of our city. My focus tonight will be on the current state of our city organization, which at present is challenged by all the staff vacancies we've been experiencing. There may be a lot of reasons for that, and we know we're not the only employer, municipal or otherwise, that has been struggling to keep certain positions filled. But regardless, we can't talk about the state of the city without acknowledging this reality we're faced with. These are our current staff vacancies, 30 in all. That's quite a lot, and as you can see, some departments are impacted more than others. And while all of these positions are important, some might be considered key leadership positions, starting, of course, with the city manager at the very top. Now, a couple things I want to note about this slide. First, many of these positions are, in fact, on their way toward being filled. If you take a look at the fire department, for example, the newly selected captain, which was an internal promotion, by the way, is currently transitioning into that role, so it's actually no longer vacant, though it does create a new vacancy for a firefighter paramedic position. Also, our longtime assistant chief and fire marshal has just retired, creating that vacancy, and that position has already been posted, and we're looking to have it filled within the next month or so. For several of these other open positions, including in library, IT, police, and public works, we've got candidates who are already interviewing, and where applicable, they're doing their skills testing. We've recently brought in 3 new police officers, which is great. And in public works, hires have been made for the project manager and solid waste laborer positions pending completion of their pre-employment requirements. So all of that is to say, this slide represents just a snapshot in time, and several of the vacancies shown are actually on their way to being filled. However, even as that's happening, others can be expected to open up. But I think I can safely say on our current trajectory, the total number of vacancies is starting to come down. Now, I do want to highlight development services as it bears separate discussion, especially considering these vacancies make up a pretty big chunk of the department as a whole. We've been very strained in that area, and yes, we're aware, as some of you have been experiencing, that permits have been significantly delayed as a result. What the city has done on a trial basis is to merge development services with public works under one director. And this is actually an idea that has been thrown around from time to time over the years, given there's a natural overlap between the two and possibly some efficiencies to be gained. But ultimately, this was implemented out of necessity due to these vacancies. But again, it's on a trial basis for the time being. Depending on how that goes in the coming months, including as other vacancies within the department are filled, that director position may or may not end up being eliminated. Which brings me to the second point I want to be sure to highlight on this slide, certain of these organizational decisions, particularly when we're talking about director level positions, really ought to be made by the next city manager. And as we know, that one's on council. As promised, we've made our search for Bellaire's next city manager a top priority at the start of this new council term. And I'm pleased to report, following our first month in office, we are in fact well on our way. We've selected an executive search firm to assist us in recruiting and identifying the best candidates, and are eager to kick things off with them really quite imminently. But beyond the search process, beyond just hiring our next city manager, it's essential we establish the consensus vision and policy direction that the new city manager will be charged with implementing. For him or her to be successful, we've got to do our part in conveying clearly what our objectives are in moving the city forward, so that the city manager and staff can ensure that their day-to-day operational efforts are in alignment with the policy set forth by council. That is, that all of us are moving forward in the same direction. Hence the theme of this State of the City, and a big point of emphasis early in this council term. As I touted in my welcoming address at last month's installation ceremony, we started the term with a professionally facilitated council planning session a couple of weeks ago, in which we worked on refining our governance model and on developing our priorities, strategies, and goals as a council. For the reasons I've already stated, this was a hugely important exercise, and with credit to my council colleagues and to our facilitator, it was a great success. You know, we've got far more in common than we often give ourselves credit for, and that's reflected not only by the consensus we achieved that day, but also by how smoothly I submit the process went in arriving at that consensus. Council priorities are never about lockstep unanimity, but are about the broader guiding principles we can all agree on, even though we may differ on the individual decisions we have to make on any given issue. It's those broader guiding principles on which we seek alignment throughout the organization, and later on this spring, we'll have a follow-up planning session with both council and staff to keep that progress going. So with the caveat that this is still in draft form as prepared by our facilitator and has not yet formally been adopted, on this slide are the council priorities we came up with in that first planning session. You'll note we're referring to them as strategic focus areas rather than as priorities, since one of the things coming out of that session was a preference to avoid giving the impression that they're presented in any particular rank order. And just to reiterate the point, here's our strategic planning model, which illustrates how the council priorities, or strategic focus areas, together with the other planning elements, help to ensure organizational alignment. Although the document as a whole is still subject to possible revision before its final adoption, the list shown up on the screen does capture the several strategic focus areas developed by council and on which we expressed a clear consensus in our planning session. So as such, I've organized the remainder of tonight's State of the City around these strategic focus areas. Starting with the first one on the list, community, although again, these are not presented in any sort of rank order. Now the bullet points that appear underneath each of these strategic focus area headings in my presentation tonight, these are consensus statements that came out of our planning session exercise, which the facilitator then grouped together by subject matter, and in the final document, these will be taken as explanatory and as building upon the policy direction intended by each of these strategic focus areas. So I already mentioned at the very outset a lot of what's on this slide, that after most of our treasured community building events had to be canceled the year before, in 2021, we enjoyed a return to our regular programming, even if modified in some respects. And I talked about how that all tied in nicely with our One Bellaire initiative, which served loosely as our theme for the year across all of these events and more, with community building at its core. As you heard about earlier tonight, newly added this year was Planting Palooza, which we celebrated all throughout the month of April. Residents, local businesses, and organizations were invited to send in pictures of their planting projects to be shared daily on social media, #OneBellaire, and the city website, to showcase how we're growing quite literally as a community. We also hosted a number of planting-related lectures and informative presentations from area experts, and interactive educational events for families to enjoy, plus free giveaways. Public participation in this first Planting Palooza was truly impressive, and we look forward to its becoming a regular annual tradition. Really a great job by our Citizen Parks and Recreation Advisory Board and the Parks, Recreation, and Facilities Department in introducing such a wonderful new program this year. Also in April, we had the special opportunity to display the artwork of one of our very own residents, Paul Robertson, whose oasis tree that was destined for the Burning Man Festival out in the Nevada desert was instead forced by the pandemic to stay home. But thanks to our Citizen Culture and Arts Board, we all got to enjoy it as a temporary public art installation in Lofton Park. And given the timing and subject matter of the sculpture, it even fit in nicely with the Planting Palooza event that same month. And during the Culture and Arts Board's presentation, the chair lamented we didn't have a nighttime photo, so earlier you got the daytime, here's the nighttime. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is an 11-foot section of World Trade Center steel that many were not aware until this year is actually owned by the city of Bellaire. It was acquired in 2017 through the generosity of the Rubenstein family, but since that time it has been sitting in storage while a stakeholder group has been working on a 9/11 memorial, which is to be privately funded, for its public display. So when the opportunity arose for it to be featured at the Lone Star Flight Museum as the centerpiece of an exhibit commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we of course jumped at it. The exhibit really came out beautifully. It was simple yet powerful, and we are very honored to have been a part of it. Now our next strategic focus area is governance, and I'll ask you to please bear with me in this section of the presentation as I know there is a lot going on this slide, which I take as an indicator of Council's mindset and intention that all of these things have bearing on our decision making and our approach to the business of governance. That the city should be run in a manner that's efficient, transparent, and environmentally conscious, that promotes the building of partnerships with and is supportive of our institutions and commercial areas in a way that's consistent with our residential character, and that Council's governance also includes a responsibility to our staff and to making Bellaire a great place to work. Now this is a graphic I've shown before, simply a depiction of the organizational hierarchy of our local government. It's no accident that we, the citizens, are all the way at the top, as we enjoy the privilege of self-governance as an independent home rule municipality, and as such, we're able to influence the local issues that most affect our daily lives by electing from among ourselves the 7 of us up here at the dais. The 7 of us then, on behalf of our fellow citizens, set the policy direction for the city, which the city manager and staff then work to implement. And by the time we get down to the bottom of the graphic, it's apparent why organizational alignment is necessary to ensure the will of the people is effectuated in the day-to-day city operations, given there are these levels of separation within the hierarchy. So starting at the top, in 2021, we the people did our part. We continued to improve each election cycle our voter turnout percentage, 2017 having been a bit of an outlier as it was surely impacted by Hurricane Harvey. But in our 2021 municipal elections, the number of ballots cast increased 12% over the last cycle, and the total number of registered voters also grew by 5%. And so it's great to see more and more Bellaire residents getting involved and making their voices heard in our local government. The City Council, in turn, appoints the city manager with a clear distinction between the council's role in setting policy and the manager's in implementing that policy. And the city manager hires and oversees the staff, and those staff report to the city manager, not to the council. And earlier tonight, we received the annual reports from our citizen boards and commissions, which are appointed by council to serve in an advisory role both to council and to the city departments according to their subject matter purview, and for the statutory boards also to fulfill the requirements established by state law. Serving on any of these boards and commissions is a wonderful way to meaningfully contribute and give back to our community, and we so appreciate our citizen volunteers for all they do in making Bellaire such a great place to live. A couple of customer service enhancements that have long been in the works and were rolled out this year First, in development services, we know permitting and inspections do take time, and as discussed earlier, we're currently short-staffed in the department, which certainly isn't helping matters. But historically, it was often the business hours only on-paper submittals that contributed to the bottlenecks. And this year, we successfully completed implementation and have migrated those processes over to our new SmartGov portal. It's more convenient and user-friendly for the person making the submittal, typically a construction contractor. And internal processes are also improved for the staff as well. Moving forward, the goal will be to further integrate this software with our other systems for a more seamless and efficient customer service experience. Next, and this is what you might think of as like a 311, just as the name suggests, the See Click Fix mobile app allows residents, when they see something that needs fixing, to send it in for routing to the appropriate department. This is for non-emergency service requests, and it can also be accessed online, replacing our former resident request center. The system includes built-in request tracking, and it will also automatically send status updates to the submitter. And now that the app is operational, we're continuing to make some tweaks here and there based on some really great feedback we've received from residents who have tried it out, and we definitely appreciate your input on it. As you'd expect, it has been an exceptionally busy year for our HR department, what with all these vacancies and all. But even setting that aside, they've been working on a number of management projects to find new efficiencies and improve how we do things, and ultimately to ensure Bellaire remains a great place to work. Their staffing and compensation reviews featured prominently in this year's budget cycle in our pursuit of a more competitive and equitable pay plan to attract and retain the talented professionals who provide the daily services we all depend on. And HR have also been upgrading and updating our internal systems, digitizing paper files and workflows, and making better use of available technology. In last year's State of the City, I shared with you that we had published the first section on our craft page and had submitted it to the Texas Comptroller's Transparency Star program for review. And since that time, I'm pleased to report we have received our Transparency Star for that first section, Traditional Finances, and also for a second section that we completed and submitted this past year as well, covering debt obligations. We're now working on the next two stars for contracts and procurement and for public pensions. And this craft information can be accessed by clicking on the Our Government dropdown on the city website. Additionally, we continue to be recognized for our financial transparency by the Government Finance Officers Association with their Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting and the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. Now, in keeping with tradition over the past several years, it wouldn't be the State of the City without this buckets slide, which members of the public have found helpful in graphically depicting our general and debt service funds, as that's where our property taxes go. This year, in going over this slide, I'll take the opportunity to address a common misconception, which is oft repeated, particularly around election time. Sometimes folks will conflate the funding sources that go to debt service in making the claim that fully half of our annual budget is just to pay debt. What they overlook is that the enterprise fund also pays its share of the debt outstanding for issuances that were used to fund capital improvements to our water and wastewater utilities. Otherwise, we would be inappropriately subsidizing enterprise uses with higher property taxes. And we do the same thing, by the way, with respect to enterprise fund overhead expenses with an annual transfer from the enterprise to the general fund to ensure we're capturing the actual cost of providing utility services, again, to avoid those costs being subsidized by our property taxes. It's your water and wastewater usage that should determine what you pay for these services, not the appraised value of your home. And while we're on the subject, the user fee and cost allocation study we conducted last year proved what we've suspected for a while now, that over the past several years, the enterprise fund has not been carrying its full share of these administrative and overhead costs. And so that $1.1 million that you see on the screen represents an increase this year to the tune of $449,000 to fully capture those costs. And what is also sometimes overlooked in the popular narrative about our debt service relative to budget is that we actually have two separate property tax rates, one for maintenance and operations and one for debt service. And I mention that just because it's perhaps an even easier way of looking at it. The portion of our property taxes that go to pay for debt service is currently 1/3, which is a manageable ratio and really not all that unusual for cities that have unfunded infrastructure needs, as we most certainly do. As you can see, 55% of all our debt outstanding went to pay for street, drainage, and sidewalk projects over the course of successive bond programs spanning the past 20 years. During that time, we achieved the total reconstruction of about 1/3 of our street and drainage inventory, a dire need for which no funding had been set aside in the years leading up to that point, leaving the city with no real options at that time but to issue debt to pay for it all. With only 1/3 completed, we still have a long way to go, and just as it was back then, the big question remains today, how to pay for it all. I'll also mention on this slide, water and wastewater combine for another 24% of our outstanding indebtedness, and as noted previously, that portion of our debt is supported by utility rates, not by property taxes. So back to our buckets slide, just a couple further observations. You'll note we've maintained a quite healthy ending fund balance at $6 million. That's deliberate, as council over the past couple of years has looked to build up more of a reserve for funding projects on a pay-as-you-go basis as an alternative to issuing more debt. Although that's obviously limited to projects within a certain range of price tags, we would never want to raise taxes as much as it would take to resume our previous pace of street and drainage work with cash out of pocket. And then lastly, on this bucket slide, we use it each year to show that our budgets are structurally balanced and that recurring uses never exceed recurring sources, meaning we don't look to one-time revenues to cover ongoing expenses. Speaking of one-time revenues, in Bellaire, we've gotten our fair share of pandemic-related funding. First, under the 2020 Federal CARES Act, we received a little over $1 million out of a direct allocation to Harris County of $426 million. And then more recently, under the American Rescue Plan Act, we've got a total of $4.7 million coming our way, the first half of which we already received this past August, with the second half to follow in August of this year. And the nice thing about this program is that it offers greater flexibility, allowing local governments like ours to use these funds not only for pandemic-related impacts, but also for certain infrastructure improvements, including for water, wastewater, and stormwater improvements. Not a whole lot of change on this slide. As compared to fiscal year 2021, the percentage of our total general fund revenues made up of property taxes has come down slightly, from 65% to 63%, and sales taxes are a point higher at 12% of total revenues versus last year's 11%. Same story here. This year we're at 86% compared to last year's 87%, but the point remains that the overwhelming majority of property taxes we collect come from residential taxpayers, which is no surprise at all given our predominantly residential character and our still underdeveloped and undervalued commercial sector as compared to the residential. Now here's where that 63% of general fund revenues coming from property taxes stacks up against our comparator communities. Just as a quick aside, these comparators are chosen based on population, residential character, and land area, although we also include the city of Houston along with Westview and Southside Place, given their proximity and as natural references for us. And here's the flip side of our reliance on property taxes. As you'd expect, a comparatively low percentage of revenues derived from sales taxes. Sometimes when folks refer to the property taxes they pay each year, they tend to forget that the city of Bellaire is just one of several taxing jurisdictions on their bill. Taking a house at the average appraised value in Bellaire and assuming the standard homestead exemption, but not including the over 65 or disabled exemptions, we see for that house almost half of the taxes go to HISD, followed by the city at around 20% and Harris County at 17%. Now, looking at our city property tax burden, what this chart does is to take that hypothetical average value Bellaire home with standard homestead exemption and calculates what the city property tax would be on that home in each of the comparator jurisdictions. We do it this way, comparing the actual tax burden rather than just property tax rates, because it can be very misleading to rely on tax rates alone, since not all of the cities offer a standard homestead exemption like we do. Something else to bear in mind when considering this chart is that it's comparing city property taxes calculated using our average value in Bellaire of $928,035. But of course, we recognize that in some of these cities, you can get a lot more house for that money, and in some cities, you might get less. That said, the overall tax burden is an accurate way to compare property taxes among these jurisdictions, and as you can see, Bellaire comes in below the average. And we're below the state average as well, looking here at just the nominal rate without regard to exemptions or any other variations among cities. Looking now at our debt per capita, there's certainly no denying we're at the higher end of that. And that is for reasons discussed earlier. Let's all remember what that debt went to pay for. But what that per capita measure does not take into account is our overall debt capacity as reflected on this slide. In short, we're able to afford to do the projects that need to get done and to take on the debt necessary to pay for them. Not only is that confirmed by our AAA bond rating, but our intention and willingness to do these projects to improve our infrastructure and maintain our asset values is actually one of the factors the bond raters consider in reaffirming our AAA bond rating. In other words, they're expecting we're not going to allow the place to fall apart. With interest rates at historic lows, we've had good success with bond refundings, including 2 last year, totaling about $14 million, producing a net present value savings of a little over $1.5 million. We'll continue looking for refunding opportunities anytime there's positive value in doing so, although it's all eyes on the Fed at this point, as interest rates may soon start creeping up again. Now, with those refundings, and also just in the ordinary course of servicing our debt, here you can see that our outstanding balance has been coming down in recent years, and we're projected to end this fiscal year at $105 million, down from $125 million at fiscal year end 2018. Our next strategic focus area is infrastructure, including, of course, a big emphasis on flood mitigation and drainage. The Master Drainage Concept Plan is at the forefront of our regional approach to flooding and is finally nearing completion. The project team are putting the finishing touches on their report and are at the stage now of presenting it to our partners in the study, Harris County Flood Control and TxDOT, as well as the City of Houston as an obvious stakeholder and one we hope to partner with on mutually beneficial projects. In evaluating the various improvement alternatives they'd come up with, the project team was guided by feedback from our Citizen Flood Hazard Mitigation Task Force, the City Council, and other stakeholders, and selected what's referred to as Concept C as best meeting these objectives I've listed on the screen. Concept C itself is broken up into potential phases and is being presented as such to the stakeholders in order to identify and move quickly on immediately available funding sources. Phase 1 starts with Cypress Ditch, not only based on our having prioritized it, but because it's important to the county too. And there are county bond funds that have already been specifically allocated for improvements to Cypress Ditch that we hope to be able to tap into. At the same time, we're also talking with TxDOT about including in Phase 1 a project to extend from Glenmont down to Cedar Street, the 10x8 box culvert we started in partnership with them in connection with the reconstruction of the 610-59 interchange. Now, the section of Cypress Ditch we're talking about for Phase 1 is the area within the yellow box, so that's from 610 down to the bayou, which is directly adjacent to Southdale and would in the future be in place to receive additional volumes from an expanded Newcastle system, whether by tunneling or otherwise. Shown in green are improvements envisioned to the 610 system, which of course is TxDOT's, to include the portion of Cypress Ditch that's within the 610 right-of-way, And then in blue is a potential phase 2 project that would continue the improvement of Cypress Ditch moving upstream. I mentioned a moment ago the 10 by 8 box culvert already started along 610. Back in 2017, we were able to work out a 2-for-1 cost sharing agreement with TxDOT, they being the 2 and we the 1, to go above and beyond the bare minimum drainage TxDOT was required to do in connection with the interchange project. It runs 1,850 linear feet from just south of West Park down to Glenmont at the southern limits of the interchange project. But even back at that time, we knew it was just a start. We're now looking as part of phase 1 to continue that 10 by 8 from Glenmont all the way down to Cedar, the segment I've circled in yellow up on the screen. This is needed to handle the sheet flow that tends to back up into the neighborhood west of the elevated freeway, which acts as a dam during flood events, impacting that whole area along First Street from around Bissonnette and going north to Palmetto, Elm, Jacquette, Wedgwood, all the way up to Terminal Street at the northern end. No doubt we're talking real money here, but that's been the intent all along with the Master Drainage Concept Plan, to think big and to come up with boldly ambitious, yet still achievable projects to bring meaningful flood relief to Bellaire and the surrounding area. And it has always been regional in its intent, recognizing that floodwaters do not respect jurisdictional boundaries, and that in fact much of the water we're forced to deal with is actually coming in from outside of Bellaire, which gives us an additional hook in engaging with these partnering entities and securing their participation. This is not solely Bellaire's problem. So of course we're looking at any and all grant programs for which we can apply to help fund these projects with federal dollars. And now that the conceptual planning stage is just about completed, we're getting a lot more specific in discussions with our partners about potential projects and how they could be phased. There are a couple other possibilities currently in play that I think are worth mentioning in relation to the Master Drainage Concept Plan. One is that the City of Houston is trying to work it out with CenterPoint to be able to locate stormwater detention within their utility easements, which, if it could be done in the north-south easement that runs along our eastern border, would complement nicely what we hope to achieve in our phase 1. The other thing to mention, Houston has also for the past several years been planning to redo the streets and drainage in its Richmond Plaza neighborhood, which is basically the cutout section on our map below Bissonnette and west of Chimney Rock. And in connection with that, they've identified several tracts of land that could potentially be used for added detention to capture stormwater coming in from the west, with obvious benefits for both Houston and Bellaire. Now, beyond flood control, some other projects Public Works has been focused on over the past year include planning for the ongoing maintenance of our roadways through a combination of concrete repairs, such as the work that has been done replacing entire panels along Bellaire Boulevard and along Chimney Rock, among other locations, as well as asphalt overlays where appropriate. And they've also been looking to bring in outside help for grant procurements, which can sometimes be very complex and require a lot of coordination, and for which particular expertise can be very beneficial. This is one of those areas where there is a natural overlap between Public Works and Development Services, and so as we continue to evaluate the merger of the two departments beyond this current trial period, that's something we'll be looking at. In the past year, we also completed pump replacements at our Central and Renwick water wells. And as we shared with you heading into the cold snap this past weekend, we made several improvements system-wide to winterize our water and wastewater facilities so that we be better prepared than we were last year in the event of prolonged freezing temperatures and even power loss. Now, a definite low point of 2021 was the total bungling of our CRS classification and the resulting loss of our flood insurance discount. It's inexcusable, and no one from the city would even try to defend it. Don't think for a minute that I'm not just as mad about it as you are, and same for the city council. It really is unfortunate that the actions of one staff member, or in this case the lack of actions, has impacted so many people. But if that was a low point, then it has equally been a highlight, the way our staff have handled the problem since. When we say fast-tracked, we mean it. In fact, that was actually FEMA's word The agency, the regional flood insurance liaison here in Texas, told us that neither he nor his boss had ever seen a community get back into the CRS as quickly as we have. As you may know, there are only 2 entry points each year, April 1 and October 1. And having lost our rating effective October 1 of last year, we are already back into the program effective at the very next opportunity, which is April 1 of this year. At that time, our classification will be partially restored to a 9, and then everything is on schedule and proceeding according to plan for our full restoration to a classification of 7, effective October 1st. Now, I would urge anyone interested in this issue to please take a look at the page titled Flood Insurance and the Community Rating System in Bellaire on the city website. It's hot linked at the very top of the website, so you can't miss it. There you will find detailed information as to what happened, what we're doing about it, and who to contact if you have further questions or concerns. You can also watch a video replay of the open house and community discussion that we held back in September for an in-depth and factually accurate understanding of the situation. And for our next strategic focus area, we'll take a look at public safety. We won't soon forget last February's winter storm that crippled Texas's electric grid and left us all in the dark and freezing cold and without water. And then for many, there was too much water when their frozen pipes thawed out and had burst. But nor will we soon forget the extraordinary efforts of our emergency management team. It's in the worst of times they're at their best, and I hope folks realize just how much goes on in our EOC when fully activated, around the clock and involving personnel from every one of our city departments. This event was a big deal for the city operationally, and we made it through with no loss of life, even among our most vulnerable residents. And as we know, regrettably, that was not the case everywhere in Texas, which recorded an official death toll of 246 statewide. So we were very fortunate here. Emergency response is not a game of perfect, however, and from that event, we took some important lessons learned that we can apply in future events, always striving to get better. Here are our statistics for fire and EMS calls and response times. And also, in 2021, the department has been working toward enhancing the level of EMS services we're able to provide, starting with training our paramedics on administering blood. And in fact, as of a couple of weeks ago, we are now carrying whole blood on our units, making the Bellaire Fire Department the first agency within our Houston surroundings to do so. Our EMS staff will also soon undertake advanced training on the use of ultrasound and on performing finger thoracostomy for cases involving chest traumas. And we anticipate we'll be ready to introduce those services in 2022. Here are the 2021 statistics for police calls. And as you can see, we continue to maintain a response time well below the national average. We've continued to fill officer vacancies and are pleased to have welcomed 5 new officers to the department last year. And we also wished a fond farewell to Chief Holloway upon his retirement, following an impressive 45 years of service to the city. And we installed Mo Lopez as our new police chief. Soon after his swearing in, Chief Lopez introduced a great new community initiative, Coffee with a Cop. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to attend these monthly gatherings, which are hosted by different area businesses. The program is a real win-win in fostering relationships between the police and the public, while also giving some exposure to the host businesses. The department has also been out in the community this past year, celebrating the return of National Night Out, Shop with a Cop, in coordination with the Bellaire Southwest Houston Rotary Club. And those of you who were here in the council chamber in December, just before Christmas, will remember how special it was to honor our newest police officer, and certainly our youngest at the age of 4, continuing our partnership with Stuff the Sleigh and making that young man's dreams come true. Our automated license plate reader Phase 1 pilot project was a big success. Throughout 2021, we evaluated the first batch of 10 cameras, which were installed along our major thoroughfares to identify hot list vehicles as they pass by. That would include vehicles reported stolen or wanted in connection with a crime or associated with amber or silver alerts. The cameras are also helpful as an investigative tool for the police to use after a crime has been committed in Bellaire, and the data that's collected provides solid evidence to be used in support of a prosecution. Up on the screen are the statistics from the Phase 1 pilot project, which was funded by a grant from the Bellaire Police and Fire Foundation. Based on these figures, it was a no-brainer to make the program permanent, starting with this year's budget. And then building on the success of Phase 1, the Foundation has additionally awarded a second grant for 10 more cameras to be evaluated over the coming year. Quality of life is our next strategic focus area, and I share with you some highlights of the past year for parks, recreation, and facilities, and for the library. We're very proud of our award-winning Parks and Rec Department, recipient of the Texas Recreation and Park Society's 2021 Texas Gold Medal Award in the population up to 25,000 category for excellence in the field of recreation and park management. This award covers the period 2017 through 2019, during which time the department consistently met the community's needs with well-attended recreation programs and services, contributed to the quality of life of innumerable park patrons, and managed more than 51 acres of developed parks, public spaces, and rights-of-way throughout the city. And in the individual awards for 2021, TRAPS recognized our very own Ryan Smith as its Young Professional of the Year for all of Texas. So once again, way to go, Ryan. Now here are some of the highlights of our accomplishments in each of parks, recreation, and facilities. And to mention just a couple of these, every year our tree health maintenance program rotates throughout our park system to ensure that every park is serviced at least every 3 or 4 years. We did complete that work as planned this year at Evergreen, Feld, and Mulberry parks. But as you might imagine, we also had a lot of additional trees to care for in our parks and at our city facilities that had sustained damage from the winter freeze, including some, unfortunately, that had to be removed. I'll also highlight, no pun intended, the departments having been selected through a competitive application process to receive a grant from the State Energy Conservation Office that will cover 80% of the cost to retrofit all of the interior lights over the rec center with energy-efficient LED lighting. So in addition to the value of the grant itself, over time we'll also realize savings from reduced maintenance and energy costs. And with that funding in hand, the project will be getting underway very soon. Our library, which in 2021 celebrated 70 years of service to the community, is also award-winning, having once again received the Achievement of Excellence in Libraries Award from the Texas Municipal Library Directors Association for now the 5th year running. As you know, throughout the pandemic, we've had to be flexible and at times creative in how we go about providing library services, all of which Mary and her team have been very successful in managing. And even though the building wasn't reopened to the public until April of last year, we still recorded an impressive gate count of more than 34,000 patron visits for the year. And here's some more on the library. If you haven't been by to see it yet, be sure to go check out the newly expanded outdoor space behind the building and on the lot next door, including a pecan tree that was dedicated as part of Planting Palooza back in April. Our thanks to the patrons for Bellaire Parks and its supporters for all of their hard work and financial contributions in 2021 that have made this library expansion now a reality. And now for the last of our strategic focus areas, land use and zoning. In 2021, we granted a specific use permit to the Bellaire Church of Christ to relocate its parking lot from between 2 single-family residences on the street behind the church to the lot next door on South Rice, and additionally to include an underground stormwater detention and drainage system and landscape buffer. As the next step in what has been a multi-year process following the amendment of the comprehensive plan in 2017, setting forth our vision for the redevelopment of the former Chevron property, we last year rezoned it from the Technical Research Park District to the North Bellaire Special Development District, the most important feature of which is that it allows planned developments only, making it the most restrictive zoning district anywhere in the city, in order to maximize our ability to protect the interests of the surrounding neighborhood. Before approving the NBSDD rezoning, Council did make some amendments, including to increase the minimum required setback from residential properties and to remove certain types of land uses from the list of what would be allowed. As you're surely aware, we've now got 3 planned development applications currently pending, and having held our public hearing on them 2 weeks ago, they're scheduled to come up for consideration and possible action 2 weeks from tonight, so do stay tuned for that. Lots to look forward to in the coming year. Evelyn's Park Phase 2 was supposed to have been completed by now, but as we all know, there have been numerous supply chain and labor issues that have delayed the project, and the occasional weather delays, but things are looking good over there. We can't wait to celebrate this next phase in the very near future with our thanks to all the generous donors who have made it possible at no expense to taxpayers. HISD is working toward the completion of the new Bellaire High School campus, as well as the off-site baseball and softball complex at the former Gordon Elementary Mandarin Chinese School site. And also a couple of our other city parks will soon see some significant enhancements as well, as the City Council has approved for construction in 2022 a modest expansion of the Bellaire Town Square Family Aquatic Center to include additional decking, a new shade structure, and a storage area. And then over at Mulberry Park, we're finally getting public restrooms, the need for which has long been recognized as it's one of our most heavily utilized parks. But there are also a lot of unknowns for the coming year, with a new city manager to be hired and introduced, and staff vacancies to be filled, and I'm sure with all of that will come some other organizational changes as well. But what we do know, even amid that uncertainty, is that having invested the time to refine our governance model and to build consensus around our priorities, strategies, and goals as a council through the development of these strategic focus areas, we've given ourselves the best chance at ensuring we'll have created the organizational alignment that is necessary for our next city manager to be successful in moving the city forward, consistent with and in furtherance of council's policy direction. As always, it has been my pleasure to deliver this year's State of the City address, and I thank you all for being here and for your interest and attention. There's a lot that goes into preparing for one of these, and I'd be remiss if I did not recognize and express my sincere appreciation to the city staff for all of their invaluable assistance along the way. Also extend my thanks to our citizen boards and commissions for their annual reports and for the good work they do throughout the year. To my council colleagues for all of your support and for the privilege of serving with each of you. And once again, my thanks to everyone in the audience for coming out tonight, and to those watching on the live stream at home. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful 2022 with all of you.